What's up, y'all? It's Zach with Living Corporate, and you know what we do. We have authentic conversations with real folks to center Black and brown experiences at work. And so if you are working any type of 9 to 5, even if it's your own 9 to 5, or maybe you're working like a 3 to 6, I don't know what y'all, if you're out here working, you're grinding, you're at work, you're an underrepresented person, this is the platform for you. And so we have these conversations. I mean, it's not just me talking to y'all or kind of like ranting into the ether. It's more so me having conversations with Black and brown executives and different types of professionals, public servants, entrepreneurs, educators, activists, creatives, artists. And we're doing this all with the goal of amplifying underrepresented voices at work. And so, again, we have a really great conversation. I'm the person I'm really excited to talk to today and really introduce to you all, Dr. Brian H. Williams. Dr. Brian Williams is a first-generation college graduate who earned a degree in aeronautical engineering from United States Air Force Academy. After 6 years of active duty military service, he followed a different call to serve and enrolled in the medical school at the University of South Florida Morsani College of Medicine. He did his general surgery residency at Harvard Medical Business School, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, and a fellowship in trauma surgery and surgical critical care at Emory University Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. Upon completion of his training, Dr. Williams served on the faculty at UT Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, where he taught and mentored students, residents, and fellows. Dr. Williams is well known for his role in treating victims of the July 7, 2016 Dallas police shooting. He was the trauma surgeon working on the 7 injured officers were emergently transported to Parkland Memorial Hospital. At a press conference following the tragedy, his heartfelt comments about racism, gun violence, and policing touched thousands. Unbeknownst to Dr. Williams, his impromptu speech became a viral media event, and his life of comfortable anonymity ended. In addition to his work,
but
it's real though. In addition to his work as a trauma surgeon, Dr. Williams travels the country as a thought-provoking speaker, sharing his unique insight on resilience, gun violence, and racial justice. He's also an opinion writer featured in the Dallas Morning News and hosts the podcast Race, Violence, and Medicine. So, y'all, we're gonna have all the links. If y'all don't remember the Black doctor it was all on the Twitters, you know what I'm saying? It was all on the social media. If y'all don't remember all that, we're gonna have all of his reference materials in the show notes. But that'll be after y'all listen to the show. Dr. Williams, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, Zach. Thanks for having me on.
Man, thank you for being here. So let's get into it. You're already known within your field, but you were thrust into the national spotlight after treating victims of the July 7, 2016 Dallas police shooting. You were the trauma surgeon working, and so you were actively, right? Like I remember even in that video, like it was clear that you just got done working. Like you were working. I'm really curious, considering your personal experience with police and the history of policing in Black communities. What was going through your mind? Like just treating, like in that situation, can you talk about just what, of course, there's no question as to your oath and your commitment to deliver care. But what I'm trying to understand, so like I want to be very upfront with that. What I'm trying to understand though is, considering your own experiences and your own identity, like what was it like? Was it automatic, or was it just like, look, this is what I do because this is like what can you walk us through that experience?
Sure. In that moment when the officers were coming in, nothing else mattered. I just fell back on my training. So my experiences, my life experiences, that was not a factor in how I approached what I did. And it's a large team of nurses and doctors and students. So it wasn't just me, although I was a trauma surgeon that was on call that evening in the hospital. But in that moment, I give them the same sort of care I'd give any patient. Like I do not differentiate based on occupations or race or ethnicity or all those ways we try to categorize people
right
as being different. That matters not to me. In the moment, I just saw a human being that was severely injured and critical, and I am trained to do things to try to save their life. So that was what, like you said, it was automatic. It was a crisis. My training kicked in and I went to work.
And so then talk to me a little bit about after the care had been delivered and and after you were done performing surgery and care again to the victims, you had the conference. Like, at what point did then like all of the emotions and thoughts and things like come rushing back?
Well, let me walk through the timeline of those few days.
Yeah.
The shooting was on July 7th, 2016. But you may or may not recall that on July 5th, that was the shooting of Alton Sterling in Baton Rouge.
Yep.
And on July 6th, that was Philando Castile in Minnesota. And then we had July 7th. So on July 7th, there were actually protests happening all around the country to bring awareness to this ongoing issue. Mm-hmm. People remember Dallas because of the tragic shooting that occurred there.
Right.
This happening all over the country. So I was aware that in those preceding couple of days of those two deaths, and you can imagine that the public discourse was basically a screaming match about Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. There's all this negative talk. So when I went to work on July 7th, I was aware of that, but didn't expect this sort of tragedy to occur. A few days later, on July 11th, is when the press conference occurred that you referenced. So there was a couple of days from the time of the shooting to the time of the press conference where I pretty much just cut myself off from society. I wasn't watching the news. I wasn't listening to the radio. I wasn't reading the papers. I just was in my own little bubble because that night it's the worst night of my career. It's something I still think about to this day. It just really got to me for a number of reasons. But the big thing was that this was fueled by intolerance and hate and racism and all these elements that we don't discuss about in an honest, open manner fueled this event. And to lose any patient, for me, I think about, but that happened on a night that was particularly volatile and unfortunately became historic for all of the wrong reasons. And going into the press conference, these are the things that I was thinking about. What's going on in our country? What role am I playing to bring us together? Am I doing enough? What have I done with my life? It was just a mix of a lot of different emotions and thoughts, which I didn't have the answers and wasn't really able to process completely, which takes us to the press conference, which you mentioned. And that all kind of spilled out in the moment without any plans or preparation. I just planned to sit there just to be seen.
Right.
Because my wife felt that the country needed to see that there was a black surgeon there that night trying to do the right thing.
And so let's talk a little bit about the conference, right? So like at the conference following the shooting, you said, quote, "I want the Dallas police officers to see me, a black man. I support you. I will defend you. I will care for you. That does not mean I do not fear you." Can we talk about like what you meant here? Like, what is that like? And it's interesting, right? Because it's one could almost argue that those things are like there's a duality there, right? So like, when you said this, what did you mean?
Right, and that's exactly what I was going to use. That's the duality I think that many black people in this country deal with. So to break it down into those two parts, when I said I support you, I'm a child of a military veteran. I have a lot of military veterans in my family.
Yeah.
I went to the Air Force Academy. I was an Air Force officer. So I know what it means to wear a uniform. I know what it means to serve something greater than yourself. I know what it means to make sacrifices to serve a greater good. So although I'm not a police officer, that sort of ethos is not something that was foreign to me.
you took all of this, right? So your fear, your frustration, your dedication as a public servant and as a consummate professional, and you mobilize that to an effective partnership to actualize change, right? And so here's my challenge, though, right? My challenge is I can't look at any point in American history where police have done right by black people. So just like the historicity of policing in America for black bodies. And not to mention the pathological narratives that majority media propagates, as well as the institutional systems and laws that makes holding police accountable so incredibly challenging. And so I'm really curious, because I know that I'm not the only person who has these challenges. I don't doubt that, Dr. Williams, that some species of this has been on your mind at some point in time. And so I'm curious to know, with those things in mind, what was your journey to become the chair of the Citizens Police Review Board? And can you explain what it meant to manage through those relationship dynamics?
Yes, I'm on board with what you're saying as far as the challenges. And I guess we'll get back to that in a second. But as far as the journey to the Citizens Police Review Board, that was the mayor's office reached out to me about potentially joining the board as a chair. And that was because the prior chair was terming out, so they needed someone new. Now, the Citizens Police Review Board is meant to be this body that will hear complaints from citizens about their interactions with police. And they can bring them to the board, we can deliberate and try to give them some resolution. So that's what the board existed for at that time. I didn't know that the board existed when I was asked. I didn't know what it did. I didn't know if it was worthwhile. I didn't know if I had the time. I had all these questions about the board.
Yeah.
But I asked around and learned about it, and I thought, yes, this can be something good for the community. It can be a voice for citizens, and I felt that I could make a positive contribution to all this. It was definitely challenging. I learned a lot about Dallas Police Department. I learned a lot about community activists. I learned a lot about my various board members and City Hall. So there are a lot of stakeholders working towards public safety, and to bring them all together to come to some sort of collaborative effort to ensure that the public has trust in their police department is challenging, and it's I think actually now an ongoing journey now that the board has been revamped and given more support as far as resources, personnel, and a budget, which we did not have when I was a chair.
Okay. And so I'm curious though, right? So when you talk about so it's just interesting because I don't think that we have a lot of examples in American history when it comes to relationships where the underrepresented voices have actual authority over a majority group, and things don't become strained either quickly or over time. And I think authority and accountability is a struggle for anybody, right? So I don't think that that's unique or exclusive to dominant and subdominant groups. But I'm really curious about what did it look like, especially because like you said, at the time that you were the chair, there was not a budget. What did it look like to really be the chair of this review board and talk about right behaviors? Do you feel like you were able to have honest dialogue? Do you believe that you had the actual authority to kind of drive substantive change? What did that look like for you?
So I think that everyone involved knew exactly who they were getting with me as chair. For one, they saw my statements at that press conference.
Yeah.
So I stated there. Two, I wrote an opinion piece that was published in the Dallas Morning News.
Yes.
Where actually I wrote two regarding the police. One that talked about the history of slave patrols and how this distrust in Black communities goes back for hundreds of years. It just doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
And to talk about, police departments have historically been there to maintain control over communities of color. It wasn't about public safety or protecting their rights. It was about keeping communities of color in line. So that is the history with which we need to reckon in order to move forward.
Right.
So everybody knew exactly what they were getting with Dr. Brian Williams, which, had its pluses and minuses. I think the benefit was that they couldn't accuse me of having any kind of agenda, right?
Right.
I was criticized from both law enforcement and, Black civilians for the comments I made.
Yeah.
And I was, I see praise as well. So I feel I was pretty much solidly in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
That I could equally appeal to and offend anybody that was involved in moving the police review board forward.
So your journey didn't stop there, right? Like, what did you learn about yourself? What were some of the main things that you learned about yourself that then prompted your transition from Dallas into South Side Chicago?
Well, I should say, that last comment, I was obviously kidding when I said offending people.
We know.
But I guess the point there was I was moving forward with this mission to ensure a voice for the citizens of Dallas with integrity, and I did not try to have any sort of self-gain from this. It was about serving the city of Dallas and the people of Dallas,
which is rare, right? Because I think especially like in the political climate that we're in today, right? Like you see these voices, like on the far right who, like they're Black voices, like they're tokens, like coming and like sharing specific talking points and narratives without any like real intellectual substance behind them. And I think what really intrigued me about you, because I spent a majority of my life in Dallas, and my mother is still in Dallas. I have family in Dallas, and so I was very familiar with your work and your statements, and they rung true to me and sensitive for me, considering that I'm from that area, right? So, what I'm curious about is, did you ever feel any pressure to kind of like lean one way or the other, or take on certain agendas or certain talking points that you yourself didn't agree with from a principle perspective?
I guess short answer to that is yes. And I should say, I wasn't immediately embraced by citizens that were working on police reform. They didn't know who I was. I was a new quantity, and people have been working on this reform for decades, right? These are Dallas natives that were born and bred here in Dallas.
Yeah, no, the activist culture is deep, right? There's a lot of community servants and activists who've been on the ground. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Like and it's hard. It's hard to break in, right? Like when you're when you're new and the only thing, like the main thing you have when it comes to community activism, for what I understand, because I would not consider myself a community activist, because I know that I want to respect that work, but what I understand is like really it's your relationship, your social capital is like gold, right? That's the only thing you have, and if you're unknown, then it's hard to break the ice.
Exactly. And I will say your podcast is a form of activism. So
I appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Williams, man. You got me blushing, man. So let's talk. so let's talk.
You're doing it, man. You're doing it.
Man, I really appreciate it. Let's talk about South Side Chicago. Like you transitioned, you went there. Like, what was the call or the impetus to transition from Dallas to Chicago?
Well, my journey in healthcare, I've always been very mission driven about what I can do to eradicate racial healthcare disparities. And that is a nationwide mission, right? That can occur anywhere. Now, as a trauma surgeon, I'm particularly focused on gun violence as well. So, Southside Chicago, it's just a lot of gun violence here. It's frequently talked about in the media in ways that aren't. I think that dehumanizes the population that's there living within these violent communities. There's a new trauma center that opened up in the area, and several of my mentors were here at the trauma center. So there was this perfect storm of the mission that I want to serve with a community that was very active in getting this trauma center here built with people I know that had flocked here. And I said, you know what? I would like to be a part of having impact that will cross generations, right? And I think it's happening right now. And that's why I wanted to join this group here.
And
as far as Dallas,
yeah,
that was not an easy decision. I've been in Dallas. I was in Dallas for 9 years. It's the longest I've been in one spot my whole life. It's not my de facto home. If Texas will accept me, it is pretty much my de facto home, having been moving my entire life as a military kid, as a military officer. I feel at home in Dallas. I still follow what's going on in Dallas. I'm interested in what's going to happen to my home city.
And so, I'm interested, right? Like, in addition to this, you're a respected healthcare leader. Can we talk a little bit about how your work, and the legacy of racism, impacts healthcare inequity, right? Like, so, I mean, you're coming in and you're in Chicago, and yes, like, you're supporting, there's a gun violence issue in Southside Chicago, and I, honestly, I really do wish that some folks never found out about Chicago, because I feel as if it's like the default when anybody ever wants to pathologize Black folks.
Exactly.
It's very annoying. Like, it's just like, golly, I wish anything Chicago, I just wish y'all wouldn't have known about it. But, in your work, can you talk a little bit about like how healthcare inequity shows up, right? Like, there's been an ever growing talking point or just point of awareness, right? And like in headlines and just mainstream media is growing awareness around healthcare inequity for Black and brown folks juxtaposed to majority members, white counterparts. Can we talk a little bit about like what you've seen from a perspective of inequity, and kind of like how you've combated that as a Black surgeon?
I would like to see us get to a point where we just get real about what healthcare disparities are, and healthcare inequities is. This is the legacy of racism in this country. It's about health, poverty, housing, education, employment. Like, there are so many things to unpack and address. Healthcare is one part, and that's where I have to be, an expert in that particular field. But I recognize that what I do in the hospital is not going to be enough to uplift these communities in need. And like you said, I don't like to pathologize Chicago either. I'm coming here to help, but I don't know how to talk about it without being offensive to people that live here, right? Like, who am I to talk about their community? So I'm trying to be sincere about my desire to contribute to uplift the community without being offensive to the folks that live here and have actually been doing the work for a long time. So I'm completely agree with you that even I feel like an outsider sometimes in doing this work.
So then, I think and I'm really excited and I'm thankful that you've been able to come on the podcast. I think what really intrigued me about having you on, beyond you just sharing your story and the work that you've done and that you do, is around like the concept of effective relationships and building relationships with individuals that you may not feel immediately safe with or comfortable with. And I know that involves a certain level of emotional labor for you, even today, right? I'm curious. Right. I'm curious though, like if you could give younger professionals, any advice about building relationships, and when I say relationships, I'm thinking more like coalitions for your personal and professional development and journey. Like, if you could like boil it down to like 3 things, what would they be?
I would say first and foremost, to young professionals, nothing is worth sacrificing your dignity for acceptance. Well, what I mean is that the papers and the promotions and the titles, like if you have to leave part of who you are at home, if you have to compromise your integrity and your ethics and your purpose to achieve those goals aren't worth it. So do not hand over your dignity for acceptance. That's 1. 2, you need to set your boundaries. If you don't set your boundaries, someone else will set them for you, and you may not like them. And actually, I believe that if you set your boundaries, that will lead to greater connectedness with people, not less, because you are respecting who you are and what you stand for. You will not let anyone else compromise that for you. And third thing is this: always keep your end goal in mind. As you're going through life, your profession, like think about what it is you want to accomplish, where you want to be. If you never lose sight of that, then all that noise and chaos that you encounter on the way, you'll be able to filter through that and not lose sight of the end objective. So people call it your North Star, your purpose, the end goal, whatever that is, never lose sight of that.
Man, Dr. Williams, this has been a great conversation. I just got to thank you again for being a guest on the podcast. Man, any shout outs or parting words before we let you go?
No, Zach, first of all, thank you very much. I'm honored that you asked me to be on the show, and I'm glad we were able to make this happen. And I'm always happy to engage with listeners. They can check out my website, brianwilliamsmd.com. That's Brian with an I. I'm pretty active on Twitter at bhwilliamsmd. But if you do drop me a line, email, or direct message, I will get back to you. And you talked about making connections. That's one way that I have increased my connectivity with the universe. Thanks again.
Man, thank you so much. All right, y'all. Y'all know what it is. You've been listening to Dr. Williams, surgeon, speaker, educator, public servant, man. Just overall dope individual. Till next time, this has been Zach. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.